Would you rather have an MBA or an MBE?
MBA
Okay, why?
because it's
Welcome to Low to Grow, the podcast transforming life's toughest moments into opportunity for growth. I'm Annie, a Forbes Under 30 technology founder whose entrepreneurship journey ran parallel to a mental health awakening. In every episode, I sit down with inspiring individuals and delve into how they managed to turn their personal or professional challenges into opportunities for growth. If you're facing uncertainty in your life, feeling down, or simply need a kick of inspiration to keep moving forward, this is your space for the honest and uplifting conversations that you will want to hear. Hit follow so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. Today on Low to Grow, we have Erika Brodnock MBE. She is a multi-award winning entrepreneur, philanthropist, and angel investor. She also holds an MBA and is a Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence at King's College London, as well as being a Leadership Fellow at the University of Exeter and a PhD candidate in the Inclusion Initiative at the London School of Economics. Now, Erika is the co-founder of KinHub, which is a work-life intelligence platform that's helping organizations to boost productivity, performance, and retention through AI-powered coaching and support. She is also a non-executive director at the Diversity VC and also the Good Play Guide, alongside being a trustee for the Black Funding Network, an investment committee member for the Resonance Community Fund, and also serves on the advisory boards for the APPG for Entrepreneurship and also at the Oxford Brookes Business School. Erika, that is a host of responsibilities. I am so delighted that you made the time in your day to join the Low to Grow podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I was saying before that you've had some incredible guests so far, so I'm completely honoured to be included alongside such fantastic entrepreneurs.
Thank you for being so humble, and you are one of those incredible guests that I'm delighted to have on the podcast. Erika, before we start, who do you think will benefit the most from our conversation today?
I think early stage founders that are just embarking on a journey of entrepreneurship, as well as those who have been on the journey for quite some time and are thinking about the fact that whenever they read a success story, it feels like things are happening faster than is actually materializing for them in reality. I think both sets of people should hopefully benefit from hearing what it is that I have to say.
Erika, I know we first met at I think it was a fintech networking event in the City of London a few years ago, and also ran into each other at the Royal Society. You have a wealth of incredible experience in business and also in mentoring as well. Where did your journey start?
My journey started a long while ago. I've always been somebody that has been interested in solving problems. So even before I became an entrepreneur, when I worked, I was interested in understanding Six Sigma and lean and principles that meant that actually you were able to process re-engineer, understand what was going wrong in a process, pick it apart, and then pull it all together again with improvements built in. And so that spirit of problem solving has kind of been there since the very beginning of my career and stayed with me right the way through. I do it everywhere, to be honest with you. I bought my first property when I was 19 and it was an absolute dump, and I was able to re-engineer and fix it up and then sell that. I've kind of been doing this for as long as I can remember. And I guess I've really learned from hacking my own life. I'm a mum. I was a single mum for most of my children's child rearing years. And that meant that I was consistently needing to find ways to do things that meant that we were able to achieve more than we should have been able to achieve as a family that kind of came from the background that I came from and found myself in the circumstances that I was in at the time. And I'm delighted to say that I've been able to do so successfully, both in work, in my personal life, and then as an entrepreneur. I'm constantly trying to solve problems that I've had and that other people have had, and looking at innovative ways of solving those problems. Actually, the background that I've had as a single mum and defying odds of coming from Streatham Vale to try to escape the statistical trajectory that was predestined for someone like me has put me in good stead to be an entrepreneur and to solve problems in ways that probably haven't been thought of by very many people.
I love that. Erika, what was your childhood like growing up?
It was an interesting childhood, and I tried to give my children the same that my mother gave me. And my mum fostered in me a love for reading. I love to read. I make everything a competition, even with myself, though. I went on a holiday recently and I was reading a book, and I finished one book in about 2.5 days. And then I set myself the challenge that I needed to finish the next book in 2 days. And then I was like, this isn't pleasure anymore. You've ruined it to myself. We used to sit and have dinner, and my mum used to kind of say, well, you've got this on your plate and it took that to make it. And if we had two more people at the table, how many more ingredients would we need to be able to feed them? She was constantly giving me problems to solve. And I see that in my children as well, because we're constantly doing things like that, which I really value as an individual now. What that meant was that by the time I went to school, I was ahead of my time. And by the time I went to secondary school, I was moved up a year. So I was hanging out with the older children and doing work that was kind of a little bit more advanced than it should have been. I just kept learning, and I've always stayed learning. I didn't grow up on a council estate or what have you, but I did grow up in an area called Streatham Vale. So it's not the most affluent of areas. However, my mum and dad had purchased a property, and I sort of grew up on a house on a road, but went to state school as opposed to public school, and then didn't go to university when I was 18. And so it's not the traditional sort of background of an entrepreneur that we tend to sort of see, because usually they will have gone to university and then dropped out.
Mm, that's so interesting. And I love how you mentioned your love of books. So for me, reading as well. So I'm an only child. And I think my mother and my parents taught me to entertain myself by reading. And luckily, I loved it. I remember reading these Nancy Drew series when we were still living in
Yes.
Singapore, and I would just devour it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely can relate your passion to that as well.
Yeah, Nancy Drew, all the books by Judy Blume, all of the Enid Blyton books. I used to like literally consume them growing up. And now I kind of tend to read business books a little bit more, but still like to read for pleasure as well.
No, that's good. I'm glad that you're giving yourself the space to do that, Erica. You mentioned that you bought your first house at 19 and that you didn't go to university. How did your working life start?
So, my working life started at Job Centre Plus. I went and was employed as a casual member of staff on a 3-month contract. And I went into Brixton South Job Centre, which was in Streatham Hill and incorrectly named, in my opinion. But I worked there and I was on a 3-month contract, and I knew that I wanted to turn that 3-month contract into something more long term. When I first started at the job centre, we used to have queues out the door of people coming to sign on. I set about trying to solve that problem in the 3 months that I was there. I looked at understanding how many people we had signing on, how many people we had working on the desk, what their breaks were, etc., and came up with a system that I went to the head of fortnightly job search review with, around giving people timed appointments where actually on a 15-minute block we would be able to see X number of people. It was quick maths. And if each person did their job as they were supposed to, we would be able to kind of make sure that we eradicated the queues and people weren't coming over screaming because of the fact that they'd been waiting 2 hours to sign on at some points of the day, and then other people just being completely delighted with the fact that they come in and go straight back out the door because they come at specific times where it's really quiet. And so just spreading the load of people that were coming in through the doors in that way meant that actually staff were getting less abuse and people were happier with the service that they were receiving. And so I turned a 3-month contract into a permanent position and then managed to get a promotion and became the team leader for that team because they knew I could run it, since it was my system that they were using to schedule people that were coming in to sign on. And so I was one of the youngest managers that Job Centre Plus had had. And I think that actually the experiences that I had there were phenomenal because they didn't matter that I was young. It didn't matter that I was female. It didn't matter that I was black. It mattered that I was capable. And for as long as I was capable, I was able to kind of keep going and keep moving through the chain. I went from doing that to going to a bigger job centre and running a team there, and then on to working at district office, where I was part of a performance improvement team that looked at Lambeth, Southwark, and Wandsworth and started to implement performance improvement across the 3 districts. And that was when I went and started to do like my Six Sigma training and my project management training and all of that kind of good stuff. And so it was a fantastic place to work. And it was one of those true experiences where actually I was never limited. I didn't even, I guess, realize, I suppose, to a degree, that I could be treated differently because of any of my characteristics, because I just never was. So I stayed working there probably for about 8 or so years and then started to work in local authorities after that. But it was a fantastic foundation for having a role that meant that I was just able to excel and fly. And as a result of earning, did what my mum thought was a sensible thing to do and invested in a property.
I love that. And it sounds like you did have quite a special opportunity in terms of the environment of your colleagues who were able to see you for what you are able to do and achieve rather than judge based on appearances and other types of social factors or cultural factors that's ingrained. I love that. I'm curious then, when did that realization of how you could have been treated differently actually come into your awareness?
That's a really interesting question, but definitely since working in the tech industry. Because I came into tech full of beans and thinking that I was going to be able to change the world because that's who I am. And if there's a problem that I think needs solving, up until the point at which I encountered the tech industry, I was always able to have an idea, implement that idea, and then see fantastic results. And then those results would be celebrated, rewarded appropriately, and then I would go on and do the same thing again. And then I built Charisma Kids in 2012, and um, it felt after a while that it didn't really matter what I did or how good the product was or how many children, parents, etc., were saying this is phenomenal, or how many deals we got to have it preloaded onto devices, or how much revenue we were able to make. Just didn't ever feel good enough for any of the VCs that I was encountering at the time. There was always come back when, or there was, oh, but what about blah, blah, blah? That feels like it could be a risk. And I'm like, well, I've actually de-risked that because we're making revenue already, or I've done this, or I've done that. And I'm the type of person where you say to me something's wrong. I might give you a bit of a rebuttal there and then, but I'm going to go away and fix that. If you see where I'm coming from. So by the next time that you see me, that thing that was a problem will be no longer a problem because that's just how I roll. I would fix the thing and then go back and then they would find another thing or say, but actually we've decided that we're not going to invest because of X, Y, Z, and P. And I was just, I suppose, flummoxed to a degree because I was like, it feels as though I've tried to contort myself into lots of different shapes. Sometimes I will say that you're a square peg in a round hole. And so I tried to make myself as round as possible, but actually it just still wasn't a good fit. I didn't ever really understand why I wasn't a good fit. And so that led me to starting to look at the data to understand whether other people that looked like me also weren't a good fit. And that was when I was able to really say, actually, I don't think this is a me problem. I think this is an industry problem. Here's some data that says that the industry actually needs to change.
Interesting. You mentioned trying to raise VC funding with Charisma Kids, which was the first company that you had built, which is tech focused. What stage of maturity was the company at when you started reaching out and having those conversations with VCs?
Yeah, so I tried to raise multiple times along the journey. So there are a number of data points here. The first thing that I did was we built an MVP. And then with that MVP, I went on to Dragon's Den. And I was turned down on Dragon's Den and then subsequently accepted into Wire Unlimited. And so there was lots and lots of pitching. And I understand that, you're not going to kind of get a yes every time. And so collecting no's is one of the things that I've been very good at over the years. And I kind of say, right, actually, when someone says no, rather than taking it personally, just understand that, by the laws of probability, you're getting closer to a yes with each no, and look at it like that and just keep going. Dory's just ringing in my head. Dory, the little blue fish in Finding Nemo, says, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And I regularly do that in my mind, just so that actually you just keep going, even in the face of adversity, because eventually you kind of have to get to, if you were thinking about a dice, you would have to roll a 6 at some point. And so that's the attitude that I had when I first came into the tech industry, because it's one that had worked for me in every other area before. I went into Wire Unlimited. We spent about 9 months refining the project, building it into an actual business. We recruited a couple of people and we were able to sign a deal with KD Interactive that saw us preloaded to 1.8 million children's devices. And at that point, when compared to the vast majority of the other startups that were in my cohort and probably the cohort before, we were outperforming. We had done that deal at 14 pence per preload. And then we'd done another deal with Telefonica that was €1 per preload on their WeShare tablets, which didn't end up coming to fruition because of the fact that we couldn't raise. And that would have taken us into Spain and into Latin America as well. But that deal was on the table. And then there was one signed with KD Interactive that we were going to go live with. As I say, when compared to my peers, we should have 100% been able to raise. We were able to raise, but we raised what was CIS back in those days, and we raised around about £280,000. And beyond SCIS, we just couldn't go, unfortunately. So when there was any risk associated with investors' money that felt like real risk, it was just no after no after no after no after no. And there was no 6. The laws of probability just weren't kind of changing until one day an organization that was specifically set up to invest in female founders came along and said that they wanted to do a deal, which was great, because then what I was able to do was find some match funding for that investment. Angels have always been my friend. So angels are fantastic. But then as we got to a point where we were about to close, the fund manager suggested that the founders of the company would never vest 50% of their shares and that they would always be retained by the company, which I just felt was completely unfair, and something that I'd never heard of ever. They'd invested in sort of 9 other female-led companies, none of whom were Black females. And I wondered why I was being treated differently to the others, because I contacted them and said, did you have this clause inserted 3 days before close? And the answer was unanimously no. In the end, I walked away from that deal and we decided that Charisma Kids would become more of a lifestyle company that just serviced the existing deals and customers that we had, but we weren't going to be trying to grow anymore. And that was, I think, my first heartbreak in the tech industry. And it was the point at which I realized that all founders are not created equal and there are going to be pitfalls, I suppose, that are levied at you based on who you are as opposed to what your business is able to achieve. And yeah, that was tough. And I've done a lot of work since in terms of therapy to kind of look at that and look at my belief systems, because obviously it's not so enabling to believe that you can't achieve something based on who you are. And I never held those beliefs before I sort of entered the tech industry. So I am doing quite a bit of work even till now to try and adjust that. But the data is the data. And actually, this isn't just my experience, it's the experience.
So I'm curious, Erica, when you hit that wall with Charisma Kids and you realized, I'm going to call it an ugly truth of the industry, did you ever then find yourself almost self-limiting yourself?
Think that to a degree, the answer to that has to be yes. I don't really try to pitch to VCs unless someone has given a warm introduction or I know them personally because we've been on a few panels together or what have you, is because I have a kind of aversion to going through that process. But then it's interesting because I don't know which is the chicken and which is the egg, because I've been through the process a couple of times since then. And the same sort of thing happens whereby we've either been offered a really low valuation or something or another happens where the deal isn't right and can't go ahead. And so I need to adjust the way that I kind of show up in that scenario and the beliefs that I hold around VCs and me in order for anything else to ever be possibly true, if you see what I mean, Annie. There's definitely some work to do on my side, and that's why I'm doing that work now, because I genuinely believe that what I'm doing at the moment should be successful and has the capability of becoming a unicorn. I've not seen that happen without some sort of VC involvement. So the two things are going to have to find their way together at some point.
Okay, understood. Earlier you mentioned this is something that you've been working through in therapy. Did you start therapy whilst you were running Charisma Kids?
After Charisma Kids, I started therapy. I've had a coach during Charisma Kids. I'm trying to remember a time that I haven't had a coach, actually. I think that coaching for me is definitely one of the mainstays of why I am who I am today. I highly recommend it to everyone listening. Get a coach is the best thing that you will ever do. It just allows you to kind of think through the scenarios that you experience and to kind of, I guess, rationalize or compartmentalize or do whatever it is that you need to do to get from point A to point B. And as a founder, having that release and that support is just second to none. So I definitely had a coach. I think after Charisma Kids, I also had a therapist, and now I have both.
Hmm. How did you meet your coach and your therapist?
I'm a coach myself. I belong to lots of coaching communities. As a coach, I will swap sessions with people. And so I've been doing that for probably about the last 18 years or so. Moving on to finding a therapist, I asked for recommendations from people in the coaching community around who they work with and who they recommend, and then found someone through word of mouth.
I'm just quite curious because for myself and also a lot of my peers, so young professionals in their 20s and 30s, it's definitely more common to see entrepreneurs working with coaches. than young professionals in traditional corporate jobs, but maybe it's because they are in a large corporate structure. So there's almost mentors and coaches available through that organization. I'm quite curious to learn from you, when you were trying to choose a coach or trying to choose a therapist to work with, how did you know that they are someone that you wanted to work with? What are some of the key factors that you would try to ask them about or to find out about?
I think that you have to look at congruence and how you resonate with the person that you're speaking with. You know that sometimes you go into conversations and you have a conversation with someone and you just hit it off. You and I experienced that at that finance event, and I've remembered you ever since. And every time I see you, I'm just like, hey. So
Likewise.
and it's one of those situations where I think you should feel that way about your coach. You should be happy to see them if you're seeing them once a week or once every 2 weeks, or even if it's once a month. There should be a sense of joy around conversing with this person, and even with accepting hard truths, because sometimes they're going to have to hold up a mirror to you and say, actually, these are the circumstances and this is what I'm hearing from you. And you need to be able to accept that. But I think if you've got a foundation of, actually, this person means me well and we have a good relationship, then it's much easier to take those hard truths, if you see where I'm coming from. Especially if, I'm occasionally a little bit oversensitive, or I might get the wrong end of the stick, but I've run so far with that wrong end of the stick that actually I just need wheeling back. And so having somebody that you trust enough to be able to tell you those things so that you can accept them, and or any challenges that come up, I think is really important. I think that we always know the answers in terms of these sorts of things. You will have a sense of, is this someone that I can get on with, that I can gel with, and that's right for me? Just with physical feelings in your body. Does it feel sticky? Does it feel uh knotty in your tummy, if you see what I mean? And if things feel like that, they often aren't right. We don't tend to listen to those things in the early phases. We look back on them and say, oh, I kind of knew this from the beginning. But actually, when it comes to coaching, you need to think about all of those things and tune in to the subtle signals that you're getting from your body and your energy around the person that you're going to be working with. And I think it's even more so for therapy, because actually what you want to be able to do is build trust and rapport really, really quickly with someone that's going to be a therapist for you, purely because the faster you do that, the faster you're able to truly open up to them, tell them everything that they need to know so that you're able to kind of move through the scenario and beyond it. And so I've been incredibly lucky. The coach that I work with is phenomenal. I actually remember introducing her to Waira, and she became the coach for the entirety of the cohort as a result of that introduction. And so I've been with her for many, many, many years. Recommend her to co-founders, friends, whoever, just because she is incredible. And then she also sits on the KinHub platform now as one of the coaches on there. And then my therapist, again, I've kind of built a relationship with since probably 2016. And so now, whatever happens, I can just kind of go bleh and say what it is. And as ugly as it may be or whatever, we're able to kind of process and work through it.
It sounds like two very beautiful relationships, actually. Yeah, really happy that you were able to find that for yourself, because I think sometimes finding the right person can be difficult, and it can almost deter people if the first few that they work with don't have that, I guess, chemistry or therapeutic alliance. But I'm glad that you were able to find ones that worked for you. KinHub is related to coaching. How did that come about?
It's definitely one of the problems that I've needed to solve throughout my life, and finding a coach helped me to become who I am today. I've said it before and I'll say it again and again and again. I think that the power of coaching is unparalleled in terms of helping people to achieve what can sometimes be described as the unachievable, and certainly to help them to achieve the kind of day-to-day progress that they want to see. And so I think that from my perspective, where I'm from, very few people get access to coaching. Most people would be able to access counselling, if anything, and they would do so and be limited to 6 sessions, etc., etc., etc. And so being able to access a coach when you come from backgrounds that aren't necessarily exposed to coaching, for me, is one of the most important things that I could possibly do as a human being, is provide that access, because that gives people the power to transcend their current circumstances, whatever those circumstances are. So people who are affluent and elite, you can still kind of move forward. But actually, people who have historically been left behind also now have a shot at potentially moving forward because they're able to access the tools that are often reserved for people that don't look like me. And so democratizing access to coaching has been, I suppose, one of the biggest drivers of building KinHub, and building it in a way that coaches are augmented by AI so that actually we can spread that access and we can ensure that anybody who wants coaching is able to afford to receive it. And so to that end, the way that KinHub has been set up is that if an organization pays for 3 of their employees to access coaching, we will provide that coaching free of charge via charities to people from low income backgrounds that couldn't otherwise afford it. So that actually it's not just democratized through a workplace and an organization, but actually it's spreading further out, and it's really reaching people who need coaching but can't otherwise get hold of it.
I love that. So it's almost like the Tom's shoes model, the buy one, give one. I love that, but taken into coaching and amplified using technology. Quite curious to understand how AI is being used in KinHub to augment the coaches that you have there.
So we've trained some agents essentially. We've got Q&A models that mean that we are able to answer questions. We've developed that now so that Charlie's also able to ask questions. We know and understand that actually in a coaching session, if you're able to ask 5 key questions, you can usually get to the nub of what's going on for someone and help them to gain the insights and realizations that they need to be able to move forward. So we've been training Charlie to start to identify the types of questions that will enable you, Annie, or me, Erica, to kind of get from point A to B in a session, and either make those suggestions to the coaches that are on the platform, or if the individual is having a chat with Charlie on the platform themselves, then asking those questions directly. That's one aspect of it. The other is that we've built models that help to identify the sentiment and emotion of an individual, using things like the language that they use, the speed and pressure of their typing, and then there are a few other bits that we're building into that now so that we can start to see how someone is feeling, how they're reacting emotionally, and then the type of response that they need as a result of that. And then beyond that, understanding the personality of an individual, the types of things that they like. Are they an avid reader? Do they prefer to consume things by a video? Are they more auditory? Do they want to hear things more than they want to see things? And then really starting to understand how we can personalize the experience that someone will have based on their needs and preferences.
I love that, how it's split into 3 levels. Having a tool for the users to interact with, having a tool to analyze the users based on the data that they have, and then also getting the typing pressure. I love that. It sounds like something that I read about recently called digital phenotyping, whereas you look at people's digital history and work out what their emotional health is like at the moment. I'm quite curious. I'm from a Chinese heritage family, and in our culture, no one talks about mental health. So for me, over the course of my startup journey, I've had to really just do a lot of research and reading myself to understand what that is, and then kind of almost find community groups that basically communicate mental health to people of Chinese heritage. And I think there's, quite a big stigma, and there's like preconceived ideas from different people of what therapy is. And I wonder, for the groups that you're normally working with, and maybe for yourself when you first started coaching, if you have not grown up in an environment where people around you or your parents or your sisters or your brothers are getting coaches, was it something that you were hesitant about, or was it something that you embraced fully from the start?
I think for me, I was diagnosed as having a mental health issue. And that's what started my coaching journey. And so I came to this because I needed to. And it was a case of, I was a little bit like, actually, there must be another way. There must be mechanism for me to not have to take a medication every day for the rest of my life. And I have got to be able to fix this. At that point, the stigma and the family dynamics around it didn't matter so much, because if I didn't do something, I was going to be affected by the stigma anyway, if you see what I mean. And so for me, it was a little bit like, I'm faced with this issue. I either try to fix the issue and solve the problem and then go on to live the best life that I can, or I take the diagnosis, swallow that whole, and live the life that's kind of expected of me as a result of that diagnosis, if that makes sense. And so I chose to go down the route of, how do I go on a journey to healing myself? And then I sort of came across all sorts of different types of therapies and alternate modalities, such as emotional freedom techniques, which is tapping on the meridian points of the body, and I did acupuncture and hypnotherapy. And then over time, as I started to kind of go on that journey and feel better about myself, I then turned around and started to train as somebody that could help others to go on that journey as well, and then qualified myself as a coach. By the time I got to a point of, I need to heal, I didn't care what anyone else thought.
Mm, makes sense. I think that makes absolute sense. And then just
Yeah.
going back to another point that you mentioned, there's the AI agent called Charlie in KinHub that your users can speak to. How well was that received when it was first introduced? I mean, did people have any reservations about speaking to an AI rather than a human coach?
So that's a really interesting question. So in the early phases, actually the biggest blockers that we had to being adopted by organizations were people saying, we don't think our people are going to want to speak to an AI. And then we went live in our first organization, and we had a slew of people that will only speak to the AI and will never book a session with the coaches. I think that people who have the same or similar school of thought as you just described, my family doesn't accept this. I'm a man. I'm supposed to be strong. Mental health doesn't affect me. I'm not supposed to succumb to mental health issues. You go into speaking to a human therapist, and you kind of have to admit that maybe something isn't quite right, or even a coach. And if you've got a specific problem around an individual in your family or something along those lines, actually, all you need to do is ask a chatbot a question, and have a little chat with the chatbot. That's quite an easy entry point. You also don't need any of the airs and graces. As a mum, I have 5 children, and recently one of them went off to a festival and said that she would check in with me every day, and then didn't check in every day. So by day 3, she stopped checking in and was saving her battery, is the excuse that I got when she finally got home. Halfway through day 3, day 4, I could go on to Charlie and be like, this child is driving me insane. I'm not sure what to do. And then Charlie gives me suggestions about what it is that I can do to help myself to calm down, how I can have a chat with her when she comes back without losing my temper. Now, I can do that and just get the answer really quickly. If I had spoken to a human, what I would need to do is say, I really love my daughter and this and that. And you kind of have to go through a lot of fluff so that people still understand that you're a caring parent or a caring husband or a whatever, rather than just being able to kind of get to the crux of the matter and get the answer and the support that you need to be able to move on. Lots of people appreciate Charlie for the fact that you're not a human. I don't have to give you airs and graces. I don't have to make it all fluffy and warm and make it feel like we're skipping through meadows. I can just say, this child is driving me nuts. What do I do? And I think that the freedom that comes with that has meant that people who ordinarily wouldn't have therapy or coaching and would bottle things up until they kind of reached fever pitch are now saying, I can just ask Charlie.
It's almost like having those earlier release points, which then prevents the part from bubbling over. Erica, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. Would you rather have an MBA or an MBE?
MBA,
Okay, why?
because it's knowledge. The MBE is amazing and I'm super grateful to have been acknowledged, but I don't think that anything surpasses knowledge and understanding in this world.
hmm I love that. And just for anyone who isn't aware already, Erica does also have an MBE. So you get to put 6 letters after your
I've
name.
got both. Exactly.
I was just quite curious to learn about some of your work with the Inclusion Initiative, because I know that's something that you've been super involved with.
I've been really lucky to have been able to kind of do my PhD here at the LSE. I'm actually sitting in the LSE right now. I work alongside Grace Lorden, who runs the Inclusion Initiative. We were able to do some work that looked at inclusivity in the City of London. And the piece of work that I've been heavily involved in is around why Black women are the least likely to feature in the top percentile of earners. And that work was really important to me for two reasons. One, because as a Black woman myself, understanding the reasons behind sometimes up to a 40% pay gap is really important. But then two, I've kind of mentioned to you before the importance of angel investors in my journey as an entrepreneur and understanding how to influence and impact the ability for people who look like me to earn more so that they have more disposable income and can potentially become angel investors is really, really important because I think that often Black entrepreneurs and Black founders don't have that first layer of capital that comes from friends, family, and fools. And so the more that we're able to kind of produce people who are able to earn to their full potential or create environments in which people are able to earn to their full potential, the more chance we have of those people going on to then invest in stocks, shares, startups, and all sorts of other things besides. So I'm hoping that actually the work that we're doing around making workplaces a little bit more fair and equitable, both with KinHub and through the Inclusion Initiative, will generate lots more disposable income from people who can become angel investors.
I love that. And Erica, just going back to an early point as well, in the future, how do you see AI agents who can do portions of coaching fitting alongside human coaches?
So this is an exciting question for me and one that I love. So thank you for asking it. I think that all coaches should be augmented. There are so many things as a coach that you don't really want to do in terms of the admin and making sure that people do the kind of in-between session home play. I've started to call it home play when I was coaching actively because when you call it homework, people immediately have an aversion to it from school. The bit where people need to explain themselves over and over again each time they speak to a different coach to establish fit. As we were speaking about this at the beginning of this conversation, we can eradicate all of that bit by allowing the use of technology to store information and to prompt and to provide snippets so that actually any human coach that's coming into the equation is aware of what's going on, understands the kind of mood and states that a person's in that given moment and what it is that they need, so that they're able to effectually and effectively meet the needs of the individual that's before them. We can do a few things here. We can take away some of the unnecessary admin. We can make the process smoother and easier. We can ensure that people are able to find congruence and active fit with coaches without having to explain themselves a million times and be put off the process because of that. And we can turn around and ensure that someone is able to get from point A to point B with all of the support that they need, not just the support that they're able to get in that 30 or 60-minute session when they're online, but actually between times as well.
Mm. Makes sense. I love the vision that you have for the future. And it's also a way of enabling coaches to be able to operate and deliver at the best for their clients and to show up there as well.
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is that I'm a firm believer that everybody in the world should have coaching and should have access to coaching. But there aren't enough coaches for that to be possible. So augmenting a service like this means that what you're able to do is turn around and enable coaches to see more people, because the time that they're spending with the person is the time that they're required to spend with them, rather than doing all of the fluff around it.
Before we were also chatting about, your experiences in running multiple companies whilst also studying alongside. And you also mentioned to me the importance of taking breaks. If you had to give a piece of advice to someone who's just starting out in their career or starting out on that first startup, what would you tell them?
I would absolutely say that the day is split into 3 8-hour segments, and it's really important to understand that that has been done for a reason. I've been very guilty of kind of saying that I will work through all three of those segments and not find adequate time for rest and for play. You'll have heard from when I was saying I'm now reading for pleasure again and starting to do some of the things that I need to do in order to take care of myself. That's happened as a result of me becoming quite unwell and not listening to the kind of signs that were there that said that I needed to take a break and that I needed to prioritize rest and that I needed to probably say no more. And so actually understanding the power of no, as well as to collect yeses, is really, really important. Embracing that you can say no and still move forward. And you can say no politely, and you can say no with compassion and with respect and with love, and it not necessarily impact you negatively going forward, but just impact you positively because you've taken time to prioritize yourself. And so I think that that's super important. I think getting enough sleep is something that is really, really important. We as startup founders are often told that what you do as a startup founder is you go hard in the beginning, and you're supposed to go hard in the beginning because actually there will come a point at which all of that hard work starts to pay off and you no longer have to work as hard. I think that if you come from one of the non-traditional groups, I won't say disadvantaged because I believe that we are advantaged, but if you come from a non-traditional background, you may have to realize that your journey will be slightly different to the status quo. And so if it's different to the status quo and it might take longer, or it might involve going across a different path or jumping over a hurdle or two, etc., there's going to be stamina required. I've been running KinHub now for the last 5 years. It's taken me 5 years to get where, I don't know, some of my peers may have gotten in 3. Understanding that and then trying to ensure that you pace yourself, because the way that you're going to pace yourself for a sprint is completely different to the way that you'll pace yourself for a marathon. really trying to understand where you are, who you are in the journey, and what that might look like in the long term, and then pacing yourself accordingly is going to be really, really important to make sure that you're there for the long term and that you don't burn yourself out or become unwell in the process.
So seeing entrepreneurship or building a company or, building a career in general, it's a marathon and not a sprint. What you said earlier about being able to say no, but, reframing it. So it's more of choosing with intention when to say yes, and then also choosing with intention when to say no, and just making peace with that for yourself. I feel like I'm definitely guilty of saying yes to more things than I probably should, but it's something that I've just had to learn through, crashing over the past few years. But I think it's just something that sounds so obvious, but it can be really hard to do when you're trying to build a business. So I'm really glad that you raised it as a reminder to everyone there. Erika, I've really loved our conversation. I'm going to end by asking you our podcast staple, which is, what is one thing that you believe will allow more people to have better mental health?
KinHub. No, I think, or at least access to coaching.
Mhm.
I think if everyone had a coach, we would have much better mental health globally.
So anyone who's interested, please have a look and find out what Erika and KinHub are doing. So Erika, it's been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to seeing this come out.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Low to Grow podcast. If it resonated with you, leave a review and hit follow to help more people to find important conversations. Keep growing and see you next time.